All right, so yes, I did put up a pretty dramatically updated slide set. And so I have been struggling with it's really hard when I'm trying to teach some of these topics because it's such a big field of study and trying to boil it down to just like what we have time for. And it's hard and it's agonizing for me because so much of it is so cool. I want to share it with you, but we don't have time. So, however, I did want to expand a little bit on biocontrol because it's become a hot topic. When I first started studying biocontrol, it was considered fringe science, and a lot of older scientists that I would talk to at like national, plant biology meetings I go to, I could tell they were kind of like scoffing at me, like, God, why are you wasting your time with biocontrol? We have all kinds of pesticides and, great chemicals. But of course, now there's a big push to phase out a lot of those, including legally, like, banning them. And then there's another big push just from people living their lives saying, you know what, I don't really want to be exposed to those types of chemicals. And so they're choosing with their dollars on what they'll spend money on. And that's also driving the reduction of pesticides and herbicides. And it's like, okay, what do we replace that with? And biocontrol is a viable strategy. When you look at how other living organisms can get rid of or suppress pests and reduce disease levels, I think many things on this list you might come up with. Antibiotics is a big one. That's one of the main ones I study. But there are certainly other options. Some organisms produce enzymes that are very potent, that can be very effective during biocontrol strategies. Some biocontrol agents are really good at parasitizing. So there's a fungus, for example, that I will purchase for the greenhouse here, where you can grow it up and then put it into a slurry into the irrigation and spray the plants with it. And it parasitizes any predator or any insects that are attacking the plant. And so they're, what's the word? I'm blanking. There's a word for that. I'm blanking on it. But basically, it's a fungus that parasitizes insects, and it's very safe to work with. The fungus doesn't harm you in any way. You can see competition for nutrients. In fact, I'll talk to you a little bit about that. This is a kind of a key thing. If you can outcompete the pest or pathogen for nutrients, that would make you a good biocontrol agent. You could produce a variety of toxins. There are certain proteins and other chemicals that act, they're toxic to the pest or pathogen. There's also this idea that's gaining ground that I've been involved in studying for several years called quorum quenching or quorum sensing. So quorum quenching is involved in stopping quorum sensing. So I'll talk to you more about that. And then there's another idea that's really with more research and finding really amazing things it's called induced systemic resistance. And this is the use of biocontrol agents or beneficial microbes to strengthen the host plant. Pretty much it's kind of like its immune system, strengthening its immune system. So I'll talk about a couple of these in more detail. So I think, many on here, it's kind of self-explanatory how they might work, but quorum quenching, that's going to take a little bit more. So I wanted to explain a little bit about that. So quorum quenching is this idea of, okay, we know that microbes can talk to each other through chemical communication, and pathogens do that. So when you get sick with a bacteria, for example, like say you had strep throat, which has been going on around campus this fall. So that's caused by Streptococcus pyogenes. And what's happening is it gets into your throat area, attaches to those cells, and starts to, essentially sets up house in your throat cells, and will just kind of sit there for a while, and it will slowly start reproducing itself. And as it's doing that, it is going through this process called quorum sensing, where it's assessing its own population, like how many of me are around me, how many, and it'll keep assessing this. Because think about it for a second. If you're a tiny bacteria, you've just gotten into this multicellular, incredible human with an incredible immune system. You don't want to show your hand when you're low in numbers. Think about it in terms of warfare. If you have two nations fighting each other, you don't want to go up against an army of 1,000,000 when there's only 10 of you, right? You want to build your numbers. And so think about like warfare, think about the human pathogen idea. So it makes sense with a sophisticated immune system like ours that pathogens that get in us, they kind of try to hide for a while, slowly get their numbers up, but stay quiet so that your immune system doesn't get alerted. So bacteria and fungi are doing this quorum sensing behavior because it's a way to assess their population numbers. Why do they care? Well, they think about the pathogen inside you. They care because they know it won't make much sense, so to speak, to attack you when there's too few of them because your immune system will wipe them out. However, if they wait till the numbers are big and then they attack you, then they have a much better chance of success, which is to gain access to your nutrients and make more of themselves, all right? Not necessarily to kill you. That's not necessarily their strategy. In fact, many pathogens, that's not their strategy. They don't want to kill you because then you'd be unavailable to move around. It's help them be spread, right? So they want, ideally they want you to be up and moving so they can keep spreading around. So it's their way of sensing like a quorum. Like if you belong to a student club and you want to vote on something, you have to have a quorum of members so that your vote will be, legit. It's kind of that idea. So quorum sensing their own and other population levels around themselves. And then basically what it allows them to do is it allows them to shift into a behavior that's appropriate to do when there's large numbers of you, but not very appropriate if they're small, if you're just few in number. And so it actually causes a shift in their gene expression, which causes a shift in their behavior, which allows them to be successful in whatever environment they're faced with. So another way to think about it is it allows for beneficial group behavior, right? So again, it's like, the warfare idea. If you have enough soldiers, you have a chance of better success than just a handful. And so all of this is happening. We've now realized that more and more it gets studied, the more they're finding microbes are capable of doing this, including the microbes that hang out around plants and have co-evolved to help plants. And so it's not just pathogens, in other words, it's not just pathogens that do this. There are plenty of beneficial microbes. The Streptomyces bacteria that I study do this. And so and we're using them as biocontrol agents. So, okay, so if we know that this is happening, one way, so let's focus on the pathogen idea. If you have a pathogen attacking the plant and they're doing quorum sensing, one way to stop them from being a successful pathogen is to break up this communication, just like in warfare, right? If you could mess with the enemy's communication, their radio signals, whatever, if you could mess with that, then it stopped the troops from communicating with each other, which could ultimately allow you to win the war. Same idea here. If you can break up the communication between the pathogenic cells, then they won't know their numbers. They won't be able to figure it out. They won't attack. And so this is called quorum quenching, okay? Quench the signal. And so it is something that is being looked at really intensely, especially in human medical microbiome.
You quench the quorum, they're no longer attack.
Yeah, and so with the rise of antibiotic resistance going on with human medicine and other animals, they're saying, there's some pathogens that attack us that are like totally resistant to all the antibiotics we used to throw at it. So now they're turning to quorum quenching. Could we use quorum quenching as a strategy? And the short answer is yes, but there's a long way to go to really get this implemented. But the initial research is very promising. And so this idea of quenching the signal is gaining with human medical microbiology as well as in the plant realm too. So here's just another graphic looking at the quorum sensing with the pathogen idea, whether it be a pathogen attacking plants or humans, whatever. And so getting this quorum sensing, if you can stop that signaling going on between and among all the different cells, you should be able to reduce disease levels. And so plants are actually, we're realizing that plants can actually get involved in this quorum sensing that is going on with microbes around them. And so plants may already be doing some of this quorum quenching idea, and we just need to delve into it more and look at it more closely. But there is published studies out there showing that plants can participate in this process, and they can actually do it to help promote the beneficial microbes that are doing good quorum sensing, and where the beneficial microbes that help the plant, they can actually support that process. And they can also inhibit pathogens that are doing their own version of quorum sensing. And so very, very interesting interactions going on in the plant microbe world, and they're trying to, figure that out more carefully and see if they can use that knowledge to like develop some like universal quorum quenching ways of controlling plant disease. So to be continued for sure, but very, very promising, especially with in the human world. It's scary if you talk to people who are involved in antibiotic use and antibiotic discovery. It's scary because we're not finding new antibiotics. It's really hard. It costs a ton of money, and so a lot of drug companies aren't investing money into it because it costs too much. And it's a big, serious problem. So I think you're going to hear more about this idea of quorum sensing and quorum quenching. You'll definitely see that more as they work on other strategies. Any other questions on quorum sensing or quorum quenching? Have you ever heard of this idea? Yeah, it's not very well known outside of certain research arenas, I guess.
You know, at this point, are they working? Is it like shock and blasting, trying to just disrupt communication in general, or they induce a specific stage of quorum sensing, or is that
Multiple strategies are getting looked at, but one tool that the plants actually do, there's a published study where the plant was secreting out, so the way they communicate is through chemical signal that they pass between each other, and they understand, oh, that's coming from another one of my neighbors. I know who you are, and I know how many of you are here, but based on the concentration of the signal, the chemical. So plants they've discovered some plants will release the same chemical that the bacteria are doing. And what they do is they'll release it. So, okay, if you can imagine, let's say there's 10 pathogens around the roots of the plant, and they're releasing a signal that is telling those 10 cells, there's really 1 million of us, let's go for it. And then they start engaging in attack mode, and then the plant is like, tricked you, there's only 10 of you, and they can then defend against what the pathogens do. It's amazing. And so there's that idea too. Could you, like, even human body, have the patient take something that would like make those cells engage in a behavior that your immune system would then quickly pick up on and annihilate them? But if they, if there's 1 million of them, it'd be much harder for your immune system, right? So
Like the form of my so then they come back to like how the beneficial.
yeah, yep, yeah. There's like this three-way thing going on. Yeah, definitely. It's way more complex and way more. The plants are way more than we thought they were. When I was first taking classes at the undergrad level, plants were just, everything happened to the plant. They didn't really do anything, and now that's totally turned on its head, where we realize the plants are, manipulation is kind of a negative term. It's a good thing. Like, they are able to mess with pathogens, but they're able to encourage the beneficials, and the beneficials can act like their own personal army. essentially, where now the beneficials will attack the pathogen. So it's a very interesting dynamic, way more sophisticated than what we thought. So it's really exciting to see what they're doing in this realm of research. So along similar to this idea is this induced systemic resistance, which is off the previous ISR. And this is the idea of beneficial microbes now that are growing and coexisting with the plant. So these are usually the microbes that hang out with the plant long term through the whole plant's life. And so there's this, coevolution going on between the microbes and the plant. And what they're showing is that some of these bacteria will release chemicals that affect the plant, essentially turning on the plant's immune system to protect itself against certain pathogens. So some bacteria hanging out with the plant are able to kind of alert the plant, like, hey, there's a pathogen here, you better gear up. And that's essentially what they're doing. The beneficial or non-pathogenic microbes are essentially tattling, hey, there's pathogens right here. You better ramp up your immune system and start producing the chemicals necessary to fight off the pathogen. And they can see the plant responding to its whole body. That's what this image is trying to show, that you have these chemicals now coursing through the plant body to allow for the whole plant to become, mount its defenses against the pathogen. And so this is something that is being looked at among many different types of beneficial bacteria. Like here in this particular image, they're showing, this is actually like a root nodule. So they're kind of zooming in on nitrogen fixing bacteria are capable of doing this, and they are, but I just want to stress that it's not just nitrogen fixing bacteria that can do this. Just, regular microbes that are hanging out either on the root or in the soil right next to the root, and even microbes that are on the plant body, not necessarily just in the soil environment. It can be also microbes that hang out in the plant body. So the endophyte type bacteria are capable of doing this as well. But it's mostly being studied in the soil environment, what the soil microbes are capable of doing. So, by the way, the jasmonic acid and ethylene that they're zeroing in on here, those are plant hormones that are used as communication to allow, for all the cells in the plant body to ramp up its defenses in this case. So certain plant hormones are very heavily involved in ramping up plant defenses. Here's another paper that was just published, I believe this year, or no, a couple years ago. So understanding plant social networking system, avoiding deleterious microbiota, but calling beneficials. So I'm going to just briefly summarize what they're finding. I think this graphic does a pretty good job of it. So they're saying that plants are capable of defending themselves in a variety of ways. This left image, figure A, is actually showing this idea of down on this lower leaf, there's an insect pest chewing on the leaf. And what they're trying to show here is that the plant will pick up on that. It's going, oh, I'm getting chewed by, and they actually know like what type of insect they're getting chewed by, mainly due to the chemicals in the saliva of the insect. So they're that sophisticated where they're going, okay, I recognize this chemical in this saliva. It belongs to, in this case, it looks like a whitefly, perhaps. And so then they produce a chemical very specifically for this, going, okay, in this figure A, what it's doing is the plant is releasing a signal to the predator that preys on those whiteflies in this case. So it actually says, okay, I'm getting chewed on by a whitefly. I'm going to release a chemical that attracts whatever can eat that whitefly. And so it will actually, through that volatile, the predatory insect will pick up on that and follow the volatile to the plant and then find this juicy reward. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that's just stunning to me. And so when this first was published, scientists are like, no, it's not happening. No way. And so they had to repeat the study, and then they did both lab-based, field-based, and it was true in both conditions. And so it's now generally recognized that plants are that sophisticated where they can actually call in the predators to whatever's attacking them. And so that's one amazing strategy. Figure B, this is the induced systemic resistance idea, where they're trying to show that you have beneficial bacteria that are pretty much telling the plant, hey, we have pathogens nearby, you need to ramp up your defenses. And that's what they're trying to show here. And then here with figure C, this is the social networking idea, where they're trying to show that when plants live in groups, they're often capable of communicating with each other and telling, if one is getting attacked, it can tell neighboring plants, I'm getting attacked, you're next, you better ramp up. And again, often that's done, well, it can be done a few different ways. They find volatiles can be done, which I'm not really showing here. They're more focused on this idea of underground communication going on. And so you can have like root to root communication where roots graft together between two different plants, but you also have mycorrhizal fungi that are capable of transferring chemicals from one plant to the next. And so these mycorrhizal fungi serve as conduits for these chemical signals as well. And again, when this stuff was published, they're like, no, that can't be happening. It was a lot of cynicism and skepticism, I guess, but with more careful studies and more different plants and different ecosystems, they're showing this to be the case. So really exciting information coming at this idea of, in this case, cooperation amongst these plants. They're cooperating with each other in order to try to reduce disease levels. So lots of interesting work also looking at, are plants capable of recognizing kin, like their own species versus other species? And would they help other species, like intentionally, or is it just like the other species happen to be there and pick up on the signal? And so there's actually a lot of social research going on in the plant world, which sounds a little odd, but they actually are looking at altruism, cooperation, manipulation, these types of ideas that we talk about in social, human research. They're starting to apply that in the plant world. And what they're finding, the short version, yes, plants can tell who's kin and who's not kin. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't help non-kin. In fact, studies are showing just the opposite. Once we figured out, plants can figure out who's kin and non-kin, so they're probably just helping kin and not helping non-kin. And they're finding in a mixed forested ecosystem that's not true, and that you can have different species helping each other out during different phases of their life, which again was shocking. Most were, well, at least I hope maybe in your generation you're getting less of this kind of training, but when I went through college, it was always everyone's competing against each other in ecology. Like everyone's trying to kill everyone else. It's all competition. It's the survival of the fittest. That's all there is to it. And we're realizing it's much more complicated than that. That's not the only story to be told. Certainly there is competition, but there's also cooperation amongst different species of plants. So anyways, induced systemic resistance. Now we're looking at, the idea of the associated microbes really communicating with the plant and allowing for it to survive a pathogen attack. So along with these beneficial bacteria idea, I wanted to bring this up in terms of, you might be sitting there going, okay, great, how could I use this in my life? And it's actually, there's a really simple way to do it. And so vermicompost is something that you can either make yourself and have fun doing it, or buy it done for you. But basically this idea of induced systemic resistance and beneficial microbes, you can find that in worm castings. Worm castings, vermicompost, it's really worm manure, but more than just that, because it has a host of beneficial microbes that are also mixed into it. And so basically, you incorporate special worms into your composting system that you have. And as the worms are eating your scraps of food that you threw into the compost, they're digesting that and then they're pooping it out. But the microbes in the worms are also acting on those nutrients, and then they change some of those nutrients, and that gets put out into the worm casting. And then you collect those worm castings and use them for improving plant health, because it's essentially an organic amendment that you can put into your soil system. And when you look at the populations of microbes in worm castings, it's sky high. Really, really nice numbers of microbes, good diversity of microbes, and many of them are good at helping fight off plant pathogens. It's also a very nutritious source of minerals and other growth factors that the plants need. It has a good texture, so good porosity. It holds water well. And it's easy to do. You can either do it yourself in your basement, your backyard, just right in your kitchen, really. And you can also purchase it. There's many companies that are now doing this on a bigger scale. So this is kind of incorporating a lot of ideas we've been talking about in terms of soil management, looking at fertility, looking at biocontrol, looking at this plant microbe interaction, ways to manipulate that to improve plant health. And so this idea of slide, if I can get it to advance. This is taken from a publication that was just put out this year, and they're just trying to show in this figure different benefits of the vermicompost. And no, it doesn't smell. It's worm manure, but it doesn't smell. And so you don't have to worry about that. I use it in my home in my potted plants. So I've found that if I can notice, like, sometimes I have an overgrowth of fungi in my soil that's a little concerning, or sometimes I get insects attacking my plants in my home. And so, like with the fungi in the soil, I can actually see, like, you can see the fungal hyphae. It's not the right kind of hyphae either. And so I'll just put a blanket of vermicompost on the surface of the potting soil, and that usually nips it in the bud right there. It's amazing. I've also taken vermicompost, and you can make a tea out of it. Have you heard of that? Worm tea, they call it. And you basically just put it into a mesh bag and put it into water with a aeration. You want it nice and oxygenated, but you essentially are just steeping the vermicompost in aerated water, and then you use that water to water your plants. And that is also extremely healthy. I've done that in hydroponic systems to good effect. And then also taking that and spraying it onto your plants, onto the foliage, can also reduce. I had an insect problem in the greenhouse, and we used diluted worm tea as a foliar spray, and we're able to get really good control of the insect and knock them. Yeah, like a bubbler from a. Exactly, because most plants don't like to hang out with anaerobic microbes. And so by providing a very aerated water that you're soaking that in, it's really encouraging the aerobic microbes to ramp their population up. And that's the other key thing. Like, once I make it, I don't let it sit for too long, because I don't want it to shift to anaerobic. So I'm a little careful about that, but it's easy to do though. Worm tea, it takes like 24 hours. Sometimes they say add in like I don't remember how much, quarter cup of molasses or something like that as a good carbohydrate for the microbes to kind of jumpstart their growth. And there's different kinds of compost. Like, you can manipulate the recipe a little bit to favor fungi or bacteria or vice versa. So there's several different recipes you could follow depending on what your goals are. But again, this is something that's really simple. It's cheap to make. Really, it's just your compost. You just buy some worms, and as long as you know how to keep your worms happy, they'll reproduce themselves and they'll keep going. You can have those worms forever if you want. You don't have to worry about having to keep buying. But here they're showing some of the benefits of worm compost, and they're looking at both the idea of pathogens or pests attacking the plant, and also, I think on here somewhere, they look at, well, I guess most of this is biotic, but they're also finding that it helps against abiotic stress as well. A lot of this is focused on disease suppression. And so that is a pretty potent strategy. It really comes, it helps the plant through a variety of different mechanisms, and can be very helpful for the plant. And like I said, I've been using this in hydroponic systems too. It's not just necessarily to mix into the soil. I had undergrad students do a study with growing bok choy with and without the presence of vermicompost. And you can definitely see differences. Huge numbers of microbes. It's quite stunning how many are in vermicompost. Okay, so this idea of integrated pest management, biocontrol has become a topic that has really come to the forefront because we're needing to phase out so many of the chemical control methods. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this idea of, it's not a one size fits all in some cases. So just to refresh your memory, I think I've talked to you about this already, the idea that we have these endophytes, these soil microbes, we have microbes on the plant body. So you have a microbiome, just like we have a microbiome. And so realizing that they're always with the plant, they're doing beneficial things for the plant. And that's what this diagram is trying to show, including helping to defend the plant against pests and pathogens. So for the longest time, like I mentioned earlier, we thought that plants really weren't doing a whole lot, but now we know that they can very dramatically affect what's going on in the soil based on what they secrete out of their roots. And it can be very targeted on what groups of microbes they favor versus others they try to inhibit. And so there's all kinds of chemicals. The list is exhaustive in terms of how many chemicals are given out through the roots. And they can be involved in communicating with the bacteria and getting them to move toward the roots, get them to change their behavior. It's pretty amazing. And they've known for a longer period of time that microbes can certainly affect plants, and they tended to focus on the pathogens. But we now know that there's plenty of beneficials that are doing good things in terms of helping the seeds germinate. In fact, there's a new field of study, or I don't know what new, but a new focus, I guess, on looking at seeds. So when you buy seeds, they often are surface sterilized, or they tell you to surface sterilize them. And now there's a idea that maybe that's not such a good thing, because that might be beneficial microbes that you're killing off the plant needs. Now, the reason they tell you to do that is they're worried that there might be some pathogens that came with the seeds, which is fair. I get that. But they're saying, maybe we should be a little bit more thoughtful about just always surface sterilizing seeds without questioning it. And so, I don't surface sterilize my seeds unless I find there's a really good reason for it. I won't do it. And I've not really had issues, but I'm not growing acres and acres of plants, so either. So need to qualify that. But anyways, so seed germination, growth, looking at mobilization of nutrients in the soil to help the plant, especially phosphorus. We've talked about that. Iron is another good one that plants have a really hard time with, but microbes can easily get access and help the plant. Of course, you have the nitrogen fixers, and then we're finding that there's many out there that are defending the plant against pests and pathogens, and it really can help them. There's been some amazing experiments showing how the plant can benefit from both endophytes and surface microbes or soil microbes against abiotic stress. way more impactful than we thought. So like drought, salinity, these types of ideas, we find that the microbes are really helping the plant. And then it also does play a role in what kinds of chemicals the plants produce. So those of you who might be going into, your medicinal plant chemistry career path, you need to be aware that there are many endophytes and other microbes hanging out with the plant that can influence what the plant is making in terms of its secondary metabolites. And in fact, some of those endophytes, for example, could be making secondary metabolites that you would be very interested in, or your business would be interested in. So they're finding that, with medicinal plants, the presence or absence of certain microbes can make a difference on the secondary metabolite profile of the plant. And so very, very interesting work going on, and something that, if the microbe, so for example, if the microbe that's in the plant is making the same exact secondary metabolite as the plant, I'd rather work with the microbe because they're easy to grow. The small footprint, you just need a small, well, it depends on how much you're going to ramp up, but you don't need much to grow up microbes. You just need some liquid broth, give them the right nutrients, and they're pretty easy to grow. Shorter time frame, you get higher extraction of the chemical. So that's another reason why looking at endophytes, I think, is a really, to have that in your head. Yeah, even if you go to work for a company who works with plants, don't forget about the endophyte, because they might be crucial. Okay, well, I guess we got to stop there. We'll continue on with this after break. Please have a safe and restorative break. Travel safely.